guys, as you see here, today I'm gonna talk about the descending tracts of the spinal cord. In my previous videos, I showed you the ascending tracts. Now I'm gonna focus on the descending tracts. So if you watch my previous videos about the white matter of the spinal cord, the basic concepts of the white matter of the spinal cord, I mentioned that the ascending tracts carrying the sensory information from our skin, our muscles, our tendon muscles, through the spinal cord and then through the brainstem to get into the brain. So ascending tract carrying the sensory information from the environment to the brain. So what will happen within the brain? Brain will process those information that is coming from the environment, and based on those information, brain will provide some response. So how it can respond? Through the descending tracts. So descending tracts carrying the motor information from the brain to the spinal cord and finally to the muscles mainly. So we have descending tracts. As I mentioned before, for ascending tracts, we had three order neurons, a chain of three order neurons, like wire I showed you. Imagine that wires connecting to each other and make a tract. So here I have two wires. So these two wires connecting to each other to let the electrons conveying through these two wires. So neurons act like wires, so they are synapsing to each other. For the descending tracts, we have two types of neurons. The first one is called upper motor neuron because it's coming from the upstairs, from the brain. It's called upper motor neuron. And the second neuron is called the lower motor neuron, which is here, downstairs in the spinal cord. So they are connecting to each other, two neurons connecting to each other to respond to those information that is coming from the environment through the ascending tract. So we have two types of descending tracts. In clinic, it is classified as the pyramidal and extra pyramidal tracts. So today I'm going to focus on one of the most important pyramidal tracts. So we have corticospinal tract. So corticospinal tract, it's one of the most important tracts of the descending tract. And if you look at precisely the name of this tract, it tells us some information. It gives you the information about the starting point and ending point. So it starts at the cortex here, brain cortex, and it goes down to the spinal cord, ends up to the spinal cord. That's what's called corticospinal tract. And actually it's a motor tract. It means that it will finally supplies the muscles, skeletal muscles. So the corticospinal tract. I'm going to show you the neurons where it can start, and you should first of all, like ascending tract, you should ask yourself, where is the cell body of the upper motor neuron? Where is the cell body of the lower motor neuron? Where are they synapsing together? And where they are crossing from one side to the other side of the CNS, or decussating from one side to the other side. So if you could answer those questions in terms of corticospinal tract, it means that you have appreciated all those important points. So the first question, where is the cell body of the upper motor neuron? Here is the brain. In this image, you can see at the top the brain. This is the coronal section, like this. It's a coronal section. You can see right and left hemispheres of the brain. And you can also see some deep nuclei. It's called nucleus, different nucleus. And down here we have the brain stem. Here is a brain stem. At the top we have midbrain. In the middle you can see the pons. Down here you can see the medulla oblongata. And finally here is the spinal cord. So corticospinal tract, where is the cell body of the upper motor neuron? The cell body of the upper motor neuron starts here. Imagine that we have this different several upper motor neurons. They are here in the motor cortex. It's called motor cortex. So the axon of those upper motor neurons coming down, collectively it is called corona radiata. Corona radiata. Corona radiata is a Latin word, means the radiation, crown radiation. So crown is a circle, radiation like light array. So imagine that we have a crown and some light array coming off from the crown. So it's called corona radiata. And then all those axons condensing each other, coming together and passing through this way. It is called internal capsule. Here is called internal capsule. So this is the corona radiata I showed you, and this part is internal capsule. Then it runs all the way down, passing through the midbrain. Which part of midbrain? It crosses the front part of the midbrain. It is called cerebral peduncle. Here is called cerebral peduncle of midbrain. Cerebral peduncle. And then it runs all the way down, passing from the anterior part of the pons. Here is the pons, to get into the medulla, and here is the medulla. So what will happen when they get into the medulla? More than 80% of the upper motor neuron, they are crossing at the lower part of the medulla or caudal part of the medulla, like this. So it's coming from the right hemisphere, they're crossing and getting into the left side. But less than 20%, they remain on the same side. And finally, they run all the way down to get into the spinal cord. So when they get into the spinal cord, what will happen in the spinal cord? If you take a cross section through the spinal cord, you can find this butterfly-shaped gray matter at the center, which is surrounded by the white matter. So white matter is subdivided into dorsal column, ventral column, and lateral column. So the 80% of the upper motor neuron that are crossed at the caudal part of the medulla, they land here at the lateral column. Whereas the 20% remain on the same side, they land on the right side, it's coming from the right side, and they land here in the ventral horn of the right side. So then, what's the destination of this lower motor neuron? So the lower motor neuron that are landing here after crossing the medulla oblongata and landing the lateral column, they get into the ventral horn of the gray matter and synapses onto the cell body of the lower motor neuron. So the cell body of the lower motor neuron are into the ventral horn. And then the axons of the lower motor neuron exiting the spinal cord and passing through the ventral root to get into the skeletal muscle. So imagine that this is the skeletal muscle and supplying the skeletal muscle. And what about this 20% non-crossed upper motor neuron that are landing the ventral root, ventral column? They have to cross, but they are not crossing in the medulla, they are crossing at the spinal cord. And they crossing through this anterior white commissure, it's called anterior white commissure, to get into the ventral horn of the gray matter of spinal cord and synapsing onto those lower motor neuron cell body. So this decussation or crossing is so important clinically, and it is significant clinically, because imagine that if the upper motor neuron has been damaged for any reason at this level, for example, in the cortex of the brain because of the stroke or hemorrhagia. So if it's damaged on the right side, you will lose the muscle contraction on the left side, because lower motor neuron, more than 80% has been crossed. This model is the brain, so you can see the brain from the lateral side. So this is the superlateral surface, and here is the frontal lobe. It is called occipital lobe, temporal, and at the top we have parietal lobe. If you look at precisely, here we have a depression here, it's called central sulcus. Just anterior to the central sulcus, you can find the precentral gyrus. So the precentral gyrus is the primary motor cortex. So the cell body of the upper motor neuron is coming from the precentral gyrus or primary motor cortex. Then it passes down through the corona radiata to get into the internal capsule. So you're familiarized with this model if you have watched already my previous videos about the brainstem. This is the brainstem. So you can see this is the corona radiata. So it crosses the basal nuclei through the internal capsule to get into the brainstem. This is the anterior view of the brainstem. You can find the midbrain at the top. This fat guy is the pons, and down here is the medulla. So if you look at here, you can see it is called the cerebral peduncles. So corticospinal tract upper motor neuron crossing the cerebral peduncles of the midbrain, and then it crosses the anterior half of this projection of the pons to get into the medulla. So in the medulla, if you look at here, there are two anterior projections. It's called pyramid, right and left pyramid. So corticospinal tract passing through these pyramids. That's why it is called pyramidal descending tract, because it passes through these pyramids of the medulla oblongata. And if you look at carefully, here we have some lines, so it shows that decussation will happen in the caudal part of the medulla oblongata. So decussation or crossing will happen here. It's called motor decussation. It's really, really famous, and clinically it's significant. It's motor decussation. So, and finally, it gets into the spinal cord. This model shows the spinal cord, and here is the gray matter, which is surrounded by the white matter. You are familiarized with those structures. This is the ventral root, and here is the dorsal root. So upper motor neuron synapses onto the lower motor neuron here, the ventral horn, and then the axons. These are the axons of the lower motor neuron exiting the ventral horn of the gray matter through the ventral root to get into the dorsal root to mix together and make the spinal nerve. So what is the function of the corticospinal tract? So corticospinal tract, it's a skilled tract. Why it is called a skilled tract? Because it supplies the distal end of the upper limb and the lower limb, and their function is voluntary movement of the muscles, distal end of the muscles. So it allows you to do some fine and precise movements. So during our daily life, we use our fingers a lot, and we can do lots of fine and precise actions. So it means that our corticospinal tract working very well. If you have any questions, please put your questions in the comments and receive great feedback. Thank you so much.